Welcome to Attachment Matters, a series of conversations between two moms who love to nerd out on the subject of attachment. We'll dive into what it is, what it isn't, what it relates to, what it can mean for parenting, and how it can help us explain the current state of things.
As mothers, both of us found ourselves entangled in the world of gender ideology, following very different routes to get here. What we share in common is how the attachment framework has helped us to untangle these threads and better understand and fulfill our responsibilities as mothers in both the beauty and the challenge of these times.
In this episode, we finally dive deep into Neufeld's concept of alpha. We review Neufeld's assertion that attachment is hierarchical and why this is necessary to facilitate maturity. Rose outlines the seeking and the providing instincts, and we explore how current culture disrupts nature's process and makes it difficult for parents to inhabit a healthy and caring alpha role in relationship with our children. We tackle some controversial topics, and there's still so much more to say. Please stay with us as we continue to unpack these challenging ideas.
Hello.
Hi, Rose.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. You and I were just
Good.
talking about how we're going to be train wrecks together on this call.
Yes, yes, we've got this. We've got this.
Totally.
Ah, this is what we're going to be talking about today. Our plan is to talk about alpha. And in the spirit of what we may get to at some point in this episode or in the next, it's all about faking it till you make it.
As far as, and you're speaking about being the alpha, right? That even that requires
Yes.
some faking it until you make it.
Yeah. The two of us have got this. We've got you today.
Of course we do. Was there ever any doubt?
Ah.
Okay.
Um,
We got you.
yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of fresh off of reviewing some of the alpha material.
Hmm.
Um, and for any listeners who have been following us along with Attachment Matters, I do want to just say and be totally transparent. Um, some of what I'm going to be speaking to from today comes from one of the Neufeld Institute courses, really specifically called Intensive One. So anyone, there may be one of you out there, or two of you out there who are like, I just want to dive more directly into this content. And I just want to say, the Neufeld Institute does offer courses,
Hmm.
and there are live courses even. And I have taken everything I've taken just as a parent. And so when I speak to what I am going to be sharing today, I'm kind of fresh off of reviewing some of that material from that specific course called Intensive One,
Which I
which is,
think is the
yeah,
one I took, I would
okay,
guess. Yeah. It's been a bit. It's been a few
okay,
years. So
yeah, yeah.
good.
So as we get started here, if we kind of go back to the beginning of our Attachment Matters episodes,
Hmm.
we really started with looking at that plant analogy of attachment
Hmm.
with those 6 stages of unfolding attachment going underneath the ground, those roots growing deep so that the plant can grow and blossom and bear fruit. And as we talk about alpha, what struck me in kind of refreshing myself in some of this is it's almost a mirror to that conversation. And what I mean by that is that we're going to be talking about those same issues, but from a totally different entry point. And that is this idea that Gordon Neufeld has really fleshed out so clearly, which is that the nature of attachment is hierarchical,
Mm-hmm.
and that attachment actually facilitates dependence. And as we enter into this territory, I mean, this is just like a field full of complexity, especially in our current cultural conversations, subcultural conversations,
Uh-huh.
culture war conversations. I mean, this idea of what parenting should or should not be. And I feel like this understanding of attachment being hierarchical, the importance of parents and other adult caregivers taking on that alpha posture and actually facilitating the dependence of their children is going to sound like kind of the opposite of what many of us are being told right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of want to put that right out there as we get going, that there's going to be twists and turns to this conversation, some of which are going to be like, yeah, that's exactly what Abigail Schreier's talking about, and others that are going to be like, oh, that's the opposite
Mm-hmm.
of what
Mm-hmm.
people are critiquing right now. And so, um, just bear with us as we go.
Yeah, even just that sentence, attachment facilitates dependence,
Yeah,
is I already feel resistance.
totally, totally,
Mm-hmm.
totally.
Mm-hmm. And can
Yeah,
sense audience resistance.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, part of what Neufeld argues is that some of the attachment theorists, like Bowlby, back in like the 1940s, 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
made some of these discoveries that attachment is hierarchical, that we have, these two sets of instincts, what Neufeld has coined as the alpha and the dependent.
Okay.
And the dependent being the seeker, seeking these dependency needs to be fulfilled, and the alpha being the provider, the one who is the answer to those needs. And what he speaks to in what I was just listening to and refreshing myself, um, is that was a very difficult discovery to make,
Mm.
because the cultural currents at that time, and even more so potentially now, um, have two dynamics going on that kind of go against this sort of discovery about nature. And
Okay.
that is number one, the push for independence,
Mm-hmm.
that we want children as soon as possible to be pushed towards taking care of their own needs
That's sort of
and becoming
never do
independent.
anything for your child that they can do for themselves.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is our commitment to egalitarian values.
Okay.
That this idea that there that hierarchy exists, that we have these dual instincts that set us up. The image that is used in some of his slides is an adult who's kind of taller and
Mm-hmm.
standing above, and a child who's shorter who's reaching up,
Mm.
right? As a visual image, I want listeners to kind of keep that visual
Mm-hmm.
image present as we talk about this dynamic, that the adult is taller, reaching down, and the child is smaller, reaching up. That very idea of hierarchy is one that many of us have a very difficult time with, culturally speaking.
Okay. Well, and just to uh, dive a little deeper, I guess, into
Yeah.
that visual and kind of what
Mm-hmm.
that implies, something beyond even the reaching down of the adult and the
Mm-hmm.
child reaching up. I'm thinking of perspective and how
Mm-hmm.
much more visual field, right, is accessible to the grown up in that image, that they can see
Mm-hmm.
so much further than the child who is not at the same level. right? So
Right.
along with so we're talking about wisdom and understanding the world and having the capacity to be the provider and
Yes.
to fulfill the needs of this little one who cannot be independent in the world.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And I'm going to just put kind of his argument right out front here, and maybe we'll come back to it as we go into more detail. But his argument essentially is that the focus on independence is is sort of our mistake there is that we get focused on the outcome of a process,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that kind of does not allow us to see how we get there. So if we're pushing for that outcome, which is the fruit, right? If we go back to that plant
Hmm.
analogy,
Hmm.
those deep roots are going to allow for that plant to grow and bear fruit. If independence and individuality, being a separate being, able to exist in relationship but also be one's own person,
Hmm.
is the fruit of that developmental process, which is in many ways facilitated by the attachment. If we're just aiming for that fruit and we want to go straight to the fruit and skip everything that needs to go into allowing for it to blossom, to come forth, we, run the risk of actually impeding that process or truncating it. If we don't understand how that fruit is to blossom and come forth through, these modes of attachment.
And so I'm hearing the fruit in this analogy as the maturity and the independence, the
Correct.
okay.
Those two things go hand in hand.
And I think, I guess I would say, do we sometimes confuse the fruit for the behavior? If that makes
Yes,
sense. Like we're focusing on the behavior rather than the actual true maturity.
exactly.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And it's kind of
So,
behavior at all costs, and rather than we're trying to we're sculpting, right? We're trying to shape a behavior instead
that's
of allowing it to mature.
yes. Yes, it's all of this material when I was listening to the alpha session, what took me right back to the preschoolers,
Hmm.
understanding preschoolers course where he talks about we put form over spirit.
Mm. Now that one just hurts my heart. Yes.
Yeah.
Form over spirit. Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's why the classroom hurt for me. But okay.
That's why oh, right, right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I just had I was experiencing that as a teacher, and that was challenging for me.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right,
Uh-huh.
right,
But the
right,
classroom is just kind of designed that way. It's hard to do anything different, in that learning environment. So,
right,
mhm.
right, 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 right. So
Rabbit hole. Sorry, bring it
yeah,
back.
no, but I mean, all of this is
Hmm.
this material around alpha is not just about um, parents' relationship to their children, but also teachers to students, coaches to their team. I mean,
Hmm.
it's everywhere. Even, he uses the example of like leader, what happens when you don't have an alpha, the
Hmm.
person assuming that alpha posture uh, when they are in a leadership role. It's a
Hmm.
disaster.
Hmm.
It's an
Hmm.
absolute disaster. Like a principal not
Hmm.
being an alpha in a school, and the chaos that ensues for people who are supposed to have a leader, right? Who's
Yes.
supposed to be taking charge, taking care of you, um, organizing and orienting, the
Hmm.
team. What
Hmm.
happens when the person in that role doesn't take on that dynamic, that energy, right? And I think many of us have examples of that. from our lives every day,
Yeah.
of that mismatch. Um,
Yeah. It's kind of the container has to be safe enough for you to feel free to be yourself. That's the paradox here.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So, um, so kind of going back, I want to kind of flesh this out a little bit.
Hmm.
So we're talking about that in order to serve the primary purpose of facilitating dependence in order that one mature and grow into independence, attachment is arranged hierarchically. So there's two sets of complementary instincts, dependent and alpha, and then two sets of drives. And these drives are the seeking and the providing drive. Okay. And I'm just going to read what some of those dependent or seeking instincts are. Um, if we go back to that image of the child seeking and the adult reaching down to provide, on the child's side, the seeking side, it would be to trust and depend upon, to get one's bearings, to be taken care of, to serve and obey, to seek assistance, to look up to belong, to follow, to express needs, to wait for orders, to look for guidance, and to comply and conform.
Ooh.
I know. I was like, as I read these out loud, I'm like, I'm sure this is going to be interesting. Now, let me just read the other side and then let's discuss. Okay.
Well,
Go
and
ahead.
I
Yeah.
just want to lift up again. I want to make sure that the word you use sunk in. You called these instincts. That
Yes.
list you just read
Instincts.
were seeking instincts.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. So providing is kind of the answer to those, right? So the alpha instincts would be to take responsibility for, to orient, and to inform, to
Hmm.
care for and to take care of, to protect and defend, to guide and direct, to look out for, to possess.
Mm.
That's the answer to belonging.
Hmm.
To lead, which is the answer to following, to hide your own needs, to give the orders, to transmit one's values, and to command and prescribe. So these are the two sets, the seeking drive, the seeking and the providing, the dependent instincts, and the alpha instincts. So talk to me. What's coming up for you?
Um, mm-hmm. I'm just thinking hierarchy again and wanting to remind about our discussion of that this is in any relationship, not just parent child, that any time that there is attachment, even what seems to be peer to peer, it's going to be hierarchical. So somebody is okay.
Yes. Well, think of it as like if relationship is a dance,
Yeah.
there's a lead and there's a follow. But you
Yeah.
can also have,
You
you
can
know,
switch.
yes, yes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Ideally, if you're talking about a relationship of equals, so a
Hmm.
husband and a wife, or two people in a marriage, co-workers who are on the same level,
Hmm.
you're taking turns um, in alpha independent roles.
Hmm.
Sometimes one takes the lead, the other times the other one does. Sometimes one needs to depend and the other needs to provide,
Hmm.
or to take care of. And that, those in a relationship of equals, a horizontal relationship, that you know, we can dance, we can take turns. But where things go awry is when we're both trying to lead, or we're both
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
follow, right? Imagine that in like a salsa dance, two
Hmm.
leaders, two follows. Things get really disjointed pretty quickly.
And same as when nobody is leading.
Correct.
then it's messy. Um, so of course, I think, on that seeking side,
Mhm.
the two line items that like I felt, that I had a physiological response to serve and obey,
Yeah.
to comply and conform.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the providing drive, to hide your own needs,
Hmm.
and there's a lot coming up for me, I think, on both of these. And yet, there's the and of I see it. I
Right.
understand why it makes sense.
Right. And it's, yeah.
And
Yeah.
how scary to be a child in the world if you don't feel like you have somebody who knows what they're doing, who is in
Yeah.
charge of you. And that
Exactly.
even, yeah, I mean, I can even go back to when I had babies and going home from the hospital and feeling clueless,
Yes.
terrified,
Yes.
and not feeling like I got this at all.
Yeah.
Um, and my babies
Yep.
cried a lot, and
Yeah.
I have often wondered, whether they sensed that, my lack
Oh,
of
yes.
confidence. Hmm.
Yep.
And so there it is, right in the beginning, you
Yep.
know, the
Yep.
that seeking instinct, that trust that you are
Yes.
safe in the world
Yes.
because yeah, they got me.
Because, right.
Right? My providers,
Exactly.
they've got this. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's not even conscious, I don't think. It's just, is it there or isn't? And then what happens if it's not?
Well, and where my mind tends to go to, of course, is the cultural obstacles,
Yes.
how we are not supported in that provider instinct.
It's been
Our
totally lost.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what he talks about. He talks about that this is something that culture used to script. And a lot of
Hmm.
Neufeld, and I don't mean to fast forward here, but, you know, so many of us are like, tell me what to do.
Yes.
Okay, now I've
Yep.
learned this. Tell me what to do. And a lot of what some of his tools become is this scripting, this idea of scripting and, giving a model, basically,
Hmm. Hmm.
modeling this dynamic. Whatever it is, whether it's the alpha dynamic or something else that he's speaking to, he uses scripting a lot with how we can help our kids with difficult emotions, things like that.
Hmm.
But his point here is twofold. One is we've lost the traditional culture that
Hmm.
used to script the
Hmm.
alpha.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it is exceedingly difficult for parents. And what happens then, and I will say for myself, this was absolutely the case, is that we enter parenting without confidence.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then he does this visual in his video session. We're looking up, looking for help. Somebody help me.
Hmm.
Somebody tell me what to do. And what is the energy of that exact posture? It's the seeking.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's the posture of the child in that visual. Somebody help me.
Hmm.
And that is, and it's not you or me or anyone listening to this as individuals who are to blame for this.
Right.
It is simply the culture that we came
Yes.
into parenting within.
Yes. Yep.
And and I will say, when I was listening to this material, it took me back because so much of what was at the core of what happened with my son was this exact issue,
Mm.
was him kicking into alpha
Hmm.
and me having to reclaim my rightful relationship to him in that role and bringing him to a place of rest where he could seek and depend on me again.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
took on this particular flavor
Mm-hmm.
of a cross-sex identity, but the core of our issue was with him being in alpha and me having to reclaim it. And it took me years. It took me years. And and we could go down a rabbit hole with that, but looks like you have something to say.
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess distinguishing between when a child is an alpha and
Yeah.
when they feel safe enough to behave independently. Does that
Yep.
make sense?
Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. What an amazing question.
When they have enough attachment,
Yep.
that they are pushing for independence because
Yes. They are pushing for it.
hmm hmm
That's, yeah. And this is where there's so many layers. And I encourage everyone, including myself, to just take a deep breath and be like, this is the long game. Because, yes, how do we discern between a child who has gone into alpha
hmm
and their willfulness and their independence is because whether he calls it by default, a child can go into the alpha instinct, okay, by default, if they don't feel that their parents have taken it on.
hmm
Okay, number one.
hmm
They
hmm
can also go into alpha out of defense because the vulnerability that they feel is too much to bear. And that can be a result of the way that the parents are interacting with them. It can also be the result, like if they cannot depend on their parents, if they're too wounded, or in the case of, let's say, the hypersensitive, where the sensory overload and the feelings are so overwhelming that their defenses kick in. So many hypersensitive children are stuck in alpha. And I would say in my particular case with my son, it
hmm
was both. It was both. And so we had to work both angles to kind of reclaim that he could depend on us.
Okay. I feel like I need some clarity on the difference between default and defense.
Yeah.
Default, you're saying, is basically in the absence of an alpha,
Yes.
the child
The
is
the
going
brain,
to,
the
okay.
brain, the
We're talking about
complementary.
instincts again. Yes.
Yes,
There's
it's
there's
not
an
their
alpha
fault.
missing in this context. They automatically go into alpha by default.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yep,
Um,
exactly. So I think, you know, I mean, there's just, when I think about some of these books that are being written about gentle parenting, and that's something that they are touching upon, that they're touching that chord. We don't have the language for it, so we are naming it helicopter parenting, we're naming it gentle parenting, but I think at its essence what they're trying to get to is this alpha dependent dynamic going awry in our culture.
mhm.
Parents putting their children above
Children in the
them.
lead, right?
Children are in
Yes.
the lead
Children know
and
what they need. Children, yeah, right.
asking them
Follow
about
the
their
child.
feelings. Yeah, you know, asking too many questions. Just
hmm
doing
Too
all
many
these things.
choices.
Yep. What do you want
hmm
to eat? He talks a lot about this role of the caring alpha. It is about nurturing. And so when we don't assume responsibility for knowing our child well enough to get ahead of their needs, and instead we have to ask them what their needs are, we're putting ourselves in that seeking dynamic. We're seeking to
hmm
get for them to tell us about themselves, where we actually are responsible for knowing them, for reading them, for I know what their favorite meal is. I know when they're going to get hungry. If we're talking about food, getting in
Yes.
front of that nurturing instead of putting them in the lead and asking them all the time, just as one example.
Yeah. And this is bringing up something that came up in a previous conversation where I mentioned this, where I think I did enough of that my kids are still to this day baffled can't when I don't know their favorite meal anymore because it changes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so I guess, is there a point where I'm not sure what my question is right here. Um, so anticipating their needs, and that, yes, okay, yeah, like the instincts are getting the direction of the attachment is going the wrong way. Now we've got parent in seeker mode,
Right.
child becomes an alpha, um,
Yes.
running the
By
show.
default. Exactly. Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. And I think I want to, oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess I'm still trying to, and maybe I'm jumping ahead now
Hmm.
with the difference between that and because I've heard Neufeld talk about this, if they're
Hmm.
and I know that there were those studies done of the children that felt safe enough, right, to wander away from mom and play with the other kids, and they
Yes.
would check
Yes.
back
Yes.
in,
Yes.
right, but there was enough attachment that they felt safe enough to explore, right?
Totally. Yes. So what you're getting to is the kind of the distinction between um the perception that we have of an alpha child being very independent versus you know um a child whose attachment needs are being met in order that they have emergent energy. And that
Hmm.
emergent energy is what propels them out into the world.
Hmm.
It's the creativity, it's Neufeld always uses the example of like coming home from work and hugging his son and fulfilling all those needs of closeness and proximity, and then him going out in the world and like finding the bugs under the plants and
Hmm. Hmm.
exploring and having that spirit of like I'm going to do it myself, um being the fruit of those
Yeah. Yes.
seeking needs being
Hmm.
satiated,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
satiation. So I think those that is an excellent question, and I think you know it would be interesting to observe or kind of delineate how those energies are different, and the context they're coming out of can also kind of give us clues in terms of um, what's one and what's the other.
Hmm. 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 Because I do think I experienced quite a bit of that with my kids
Hmm.
and the too much choice and too much,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like I think there was
I do.
both
I
in my
do.
family. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's totally, yeah. And these things aren't static and they're not meant to be,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Uh-huh.
So it's not like, oh gosh, our children are never going to kick into alpha. And if they do, we've made terrible mistakes. It's like sometimes they're going to be. And it's the whole thing is noticing it, um, and figuring out how to write the relational dynamic.
Yes, which I'm glad you bring that up because I think that too I think we need to distinguish alpha,
Hmm.
or maybe not distinguish, but clarify. You used a modifier earlier. You said what did you say? The caring or the nurturing alpha or something like that.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to that.
Okay.
So,
Because I think when we hear alpha, we hear authoritarian, we hear
yes,
bully, we hear, you know what I mean?
yes.
Like it doesn't have the best connotations. And so I think we need to, yeah,
Especially when
jump into that a
yes,
little
thank you. I so wanted to go back to that. So thank
bit.
you. And it speaks to some of those areas where you felt such strong resistance, obeying and complying,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, being prescriptive on the other side, giving orders, those again, culturally, we're just like, many of us have a very strong reaction to those.
And I'll say part
Because
of
of
mine
what you're
is
speaking to. Yeah.
the spirit thing, right? Like, when does that quash the spirit of the other person?
Yes.
Okay.
So the kind of um, this whole idea of nature's design of attachment instincts being hierarchical
Mm-hmm.
is in order to facilitate dependence. Why? So that the child can receive our care. It is in order to facilitate the caretaking. So when we hear that hierarchical, oh, it's going to be authoritative, it's going to be top down, it's going to be a power dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
that is not what this is about. The hierarchy is there in order to do the, the caring for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the warm alpha is an authority, but
Mm-hmm.
it is not authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It is, but are you going to have firm boundaries? Yes. Are you going to be in the lead? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Are you hoping that your child will submit and obey? Yes. In a sense, yes, because that's tapping into that loyalty, attaching through
Mm-hmm.
loyalty. So some of these things make us very uncomfortable, but they're not meant as a exploitation or a top-down abuse or power over. It's really about how can my child be open to receiving my care?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these are the instincts that really undergird that.
Okay. And I just want to relate this then to defenses. That's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing,
Mm-hmm.
is we need them to stay open to our care.
Yes, the
We
soft
need them to stay
hearts.
open, which is the
Yeah.
opposite of being defended.
Yep.
Because once they are defended against us, they're not following our lead anymore, and we are their best bet in this world.
Right.
Okay, so we need to keep them open, and so that requires being an alpha in a certain sort of way.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, which
Not
is not power over, and maybe we
correct.
need to talk about that a
Yeah.
minute and what you mean by that. And
Yes.
versus
Oh,
what, right? Like, if not power over, then what?
okay. Oh. Let me think. All of those, all of those sides, or that whole list of things that I read off, you know, um, protecting,
Mhm,
defending,
mhm,
looking out for,
mhm,
and maybe this is a good time to kind of come back to something I was alluding to at the beginning. The child is seeking, comes into this world seeking. Let's say
mhm,
nothing has happened yet, right? Things haven't gone awry yet, but just that purity of coming in with those seeking instincts.
mhm,
Um, what are they seeking? They are, and they are seeking for us to be the answer. And what are they
mhm,
seeking for us to be the answer to?
mhm,
Proximity and closeness,
mhm,
sameness, belonging and
mm,
loyalty, significance, love, and psychological intimacy. That's what we're supposed to be the answer to
mm,
in our alpha instinct,
mhm,
not having all the answers, not being perfect,
mhm,
but their seeking of that closeness and that love, what he calls the invitation to exist in another's presence.
we
When
called it the generous invitation
the
before.
generous
Yes.
invitation,
Okay.
right? That to me, that statement is so profound.
Mhm. Me too.
The image that I always get is when my child walks into the room,
Mhm.
do I react with warmth? I
Mhm.
You are welcome to exist with me.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
see you. I love you.
Even
Or
when
am
you're
I,
messy.
or am I like
Mm-hmm.
annoyed? I was just
Mm-hmm.
annoyed this morning. I just yelled at my kids this morning because I had so much going on. You know, so again, this is not about perfection,
Right.
but it is. So I don't know if I want you to know I'm trying to answer your question this way.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about that alpha, that's not an authoritarian, that's not top down power, that's not the bully, because the alpha instinct is at the core of bullying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Alpha askew is when you're in that power dynamic, but it's no longer about caring.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the contrary, what is the dynamic we're looking for? We're looking to be that answer.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking to extend that generous invitation. That's our compass point.
It's also like I want to dig into this more even to really drive this home. Like you are always safe with me.
Yeah,
Always. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You are
right.
safe with me. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm. I got you.
right.
Hmm.
Right, right, right. Exactly. Kind of how we started.
Hmm.
We've got this. We've got you. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
And when a
Like think
child is not feeling that from their parent, yeah,
mhm,
that is a
existential.
yes. Yeah.
And again, it's not conscious. And this is where I'm so thankful for this perspective because what he speaks to, when a child does go into um the alpha mode, when those alpha instincts kick in, whether by default, because the adults in their life are not in their alpha, right?
Hmm.
And so the
Hmm.
the opposite instincts are going to kick in for the child.
Hmm.
Whether it's defense or default, either way, what are we going to see? We're going to see bossiness,
Hmm.
assertiveness, prescriptiveness, controlling behavior, can't
Hmm.
let go of things, an
So
insistence on
rigid.
fairness,
Hmm. Okay.
rigidity, fairness,
Mm.
rights, getting what is deserved, winning,
Mm.
um, seeks to be on top, seeks to take center stage all the time. Um, you know, just and if the
It,
providing adult is trying to provide to a child who's in the alpha instinct, it is awful. It's actually awful. It's chaotic, it's confusing. Why are my attempts not working?
uh-huh. Okay.
And so, sorry, kind of where I was getting with this is understanding that behavior as an instinct is absolutely crucial because it is so difficult and we want it to
The
stop.
alpha behavior, right? Those things that you
Yes.
just described,
The bossiness, the
mhm,
prescriptiveness, the wanting to trump or be on top.
the demand for attention,
Yes.
constant. Okay. Hmm.
Having the last word.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the image that I get when I think about this list is so many parents these days, I feel like say, oh, my child's going to be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mm-hmm.
always negotiating with me.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is like a clue
Hmm.
that this child could be, in this alpha instinct. That why are you negotiating? And it's not that you can never negotiate, but I don't know, there's just that subtle or sometimes not so subtle dynamic where there's this lawyering going on
Mm-hmm.
with small children. I'm not talking about like 17-year-olds. I'm talking about like
What
4 year
about
olds.
13-year-olds?
Yeah.
No, seriously, 13-year-olds in the middle there. There's,
Yeah.
I guess, because I am finding myself now in resistance, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to like those adolescent years. Like I am glad my kids question authority.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe because, and I think too,
I
just
think that
looking at the
is.
times we're in, you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
It it wouldn't always have served us well, and I can see that, when everybody just shared the same culture, that was a
Mm-hmm.
very different way of being a human in the world and how
Yeah.
we were humans in the world for a very, very, very long time, but that's not the case anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think there is a developmental, you're right, in adolescence, there is this developmental process where, um, kids are gonna, yeah, be in more of that questioning mode. And our role in the dance will definitely shift. It doesn't
mhm,
mean they don't still need us. It doesn't mean
mhm,
that we
mhm,
can't, that we
that our boundaries
stop
go out
being
the
the carry
window.
alpha,
Right.
right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, are they going to need room to push back and explore? And absolutely. And I don't
Mhm,
want any of what I'm saying. I feel like I run the risk here of being rigid in what I'm
mm,
reading or what I'm saying or what I'm putting out there. Um, there are so many layers. There's you know so many potential contradictions and paradoxes.
mhm.
Um, so I don't want to get into like there's just one right way. Authority is always good and it's always important to obey. Definitely not. Definitely not.
So funny that
Um,
you bring up the word paradox, which I had written down earlier. Such an
yeah,
important word.
it's definitely not where I want us to land with this. It's just understanding how these instincts shape our behavior.
And shape the dynamics and
Yes.
being able to recognize a dynamic, that you might want to address. And so
Yep.
can we come back to that? Because I'm curious. So
Yeah.
when you are dealing with your child who is in an alpha state, how do you remain a caring alpha
Right. Right.
and reorient them?
Right.
What does that look like? Mhm.
Yeah. I mean that I'm like, um,
And I guess, can we do this with an adolescent potentially in mind? I mean, so many of my
mm-hmm,
listeners have
mm-hmm,
adult children, and I
mm-hmm,
think this,
mm-hmm.
what I'm hearing and understanding is this still applies. Our children are always our
Right.
children. But when we're dealing with, and I'm imagining, we described this in an earlier episode where we talked about
Mm-hmm.
sort of the cascading care. It was just the last episode even, right?
Yeah.
Of our us being full enough, you know, for our love and warmth and caring to spill over
Yeah.
into their vessel,
Mm-hmm.
but their
Mm-hmm.
vessel is tipped away from us.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
how do we tip it back
Yeah.
so they can receive our care, right? That's
Yeah.
the goal.
Yeah. Totally.
Is it through
Totally.
dependence? And how do you do that without like using leverage, which is what
Right.
I
Well,
mean, that's
the leverage is
that's
what
the tool
can
most people have, right? So,
using that leverage is what can push children into the wounding,
mm.
right? Which can
And tip the
actually
vessel away. Is that what you're
push them
saying?
into the alpha by defense. Yeah, because
Mm,
um, when their needs are being used against them or where their
mhm.
attachments are being used against them as a form of consequences and punishments and leverage, it's like that's part of what makes it less safe to depend.
And the defenses go up
Potentially, right. Right.
and
If
the
it's
counter well comes
protracted,
out. Hmm.
yes, and that's exactly I was going to say what you just to get a little bit more in depth about how you would distinguish between the emergent energy of a child, moving towards independence and creativity because their attachment is secure and satiated versus children kicking into these alpha instincts. Um, it's they can become much more difficult to manage, whereas
Hmm.
that emergent child, is still going to have um, in that is still going to be in that seeker mode.
They
You
want
know,
to please you.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Um, especially they're going to be more difficult to manage, especially by those that they're more closely attached to, because that's where these instincts are really going to start to chafe. So counter will,
Uh-huh.
for sure, you're going to see more counter will. You're going to see more aggression, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to see more alarm because
Mm-hmm.
the child who is in alpha, stuck in alpha, does not feel safe
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they don't feel taken care of and they cannot find rest in that hierarchical dependence. Um, so those are all things that you could see,
Mm-hmm.
as a result of this dynamic being off.
So, okay. I'm kind of thinking of running by a little of my story here and
Okay.
seeing what you think of it
Yeah.
as far as kind of, okay. So when there was an interaction with my daughter where and up until this point, there'd been some challenges, and I was seeing some behavior that was, like, what is happening? Why is she claiming to be anxious and depressed? And, she's not engaged in school much anymore. She's just, and she's like 13. Okay. She's
Mm-hmm,
13.
mm-hmm.
And just a lot of, it was strange to me because she'd always been so, um, confident, you know, and happy, right? I'm saying
Yeah.
air quotes, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
she'd been compliant. She did want to please us. All of that stuff was there. And she was independent and, uh, she seemed pretty good. And then,
Mm-hmm.
13, 12-ish, I guess is really when it started. But still, I felt like I got this. I still was
Mm-hmm.
maybe giving her too much choice. I can see
Mm-hmm.
that now. But my attitude was, we got this. We'll figure it out. This might be messy right now, but it's okay. We'll figure it out. That's nothing we can't handle. But then there was this one interaction where she implied self-harm. Okay. No details. It was just a response to something I said. It was the smallest thing. And my confidence just fell
Yeah.
out, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
thought I had this. And instead of like pulling it together and kind of, assessing, what is the real danger here? How urgent is this?
Yeah.
Um, I I I outsourced,
Right.
which is what so
Right.
many of us, I think, do. It's like,
Yeah.
oh shit, I'm over my
Yeah.
head. I'm in over my head and I need help. Right. And we
Yep. Yep.
outsource. And I
Yep.
think that sent the message
Yep.
of, we don't got this.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of my listeners know, like, essentially, she went into a wilderness program
Yeah.
because she wanted therapy. She'd been asking for therapy for years at this point. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Why? Right? Like, we got this. This is what's going to happen if you go to therapy, and we can do this on our own. We don't need to bring in another person, but she was asking for therapy and other things were going on. It just seemed like, there was a program where we knew people and we had connections, and it was going to give me a chance to also kind of get other things in my household in order because things were messy. Right. And I'm thinking, if she's going to have this much therapy out there in the wilderness, is the way to go. Anyway, I look back on that now as a total break in
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
attachment. Right.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what got communicated in my mind, in
Mm-hmm.
my family. Now, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that there aren't absolutely times where you need to call in the troops. Right. But I feel like that escalated everything. Anyway, so I could feel it. Like when we went to pick her
Yeah.
up, it was like, oh, she's a world away from me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
What we had before, it's not there.
I'm so sorry.
But I spent the next, I did take drastic measures
Hmm.
and determined to keep my family whole. Right.
Yeah,
And so the next year we did just, we went on adventures,
yeah,
weird adventures, right? People are like, you're doing what? But what was happening for me was, oh, I need to get us out in the world as a unit. And part of it was
yeah.
what you're saying. They need to depend on me. I need to get them away from
Yes,
all these other influences so
yes,
that what
yes.
they've got is us.
That's right.
This is us now,
Yep,
us as a unit, and we got this,
yep.
right? And while I can't say that it totally repaired, we still were dealing with alpha stuff, I think, throughout her adolescence. It definitely helped, and I think it kept her oriented, at least to some degree, as
Yeah,
best as we could recover, if that makes sense, from the damage done. And I hope it was okay for me to
yeah.
go there with that story, but I'm
Oh,
curious, kind of, yeah. Okay,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
everything you're saying, um, my heart, you know, lands into my heart. And I feel like it's a very, very poignant example. And, both, it's ironic because he does talk about like when you got to like what to do. It is this getting in the position where getting into scenarios where you do facilitate that dependence again,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know? And so it's like you tried that facilitation with the wilderness experience and then you were like, oh shit, this did not work.
Yeah.
And then
Whoops.
you and then it
Bad
was like
call.
now
Yeah.
what?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then you did, the best you could to reclaim that. And these are the things that we have to grieve.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
amazing that you righted the ship, once. And but yes.
Yeah, that was, you talk about the grief, and and that is one of those experiences where I can't go back and change it, you
Nope.
know. I can still see that the what happened as a result of that choice. And we had amazing moments in those adventures that I wouldn't trade,
Yes.
you know,
Yes. And that's why you are where you are today, you know, with her.
who just texted me to let me know she's visiting in a couple weeks.
That's
Yay.
so beautiful. Yes. That's
Yeah,
so
I'm so
beautiful.
excited about that. But
Yep. Yep.
and the world continues to influence, because
Of course.
this is the world we live in.
How can it not?
And
How
again,
can it not?
our task of being in that alpha role is so challenging in today's world
Yes.
for
Yes.
so many of the reasons we've talked about today,
Yep.
that just that
Yep.
our own alpha instinct is not um, obvious,
Yeah.
right? Like that instinct has been, trying to think of the right word here, but it's damaged.
Yeah. 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 I know. I don't know what the right word is either, but I think it's kind of calling upon our, like, one bridge back is like calling upon ourselves to try to recall or tap into examples of times when we feel it is safe for us to depend. and
Mm,
and and kind of,
hmm.
it's like that modeling or that scripting, like how did that other person hold themselves? What is that energy? that they brought, and then how do I rise to that?
Mm-hmm.
I so
Mm-hmm.
often, I think of, you know, I am certain the energy that you hold with your coaching is one
Mm,
that inspires the parents that you are working with to depend,
mm,
to feel safe, to feel they can be vulnerable. And so it's like for them, you're modeling that.
mm,
You
mm-hmm.
know, I had that modeled for me, with a parent consultant I was working with, a few
Mm-hmm.
years ago, because she always held that for me,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, and it was like, okay, now I have a visual. Now I have and it's like, this works a little better, obviously, with small children, but it's like assuming that mother goose position.
Yeah.
And you
Yes.
have these people in your life, whether it's an aunt who's running the kitchen at a family
Mm-hmm.
gathering,
Mm-hmm.
or, there are the people who step up and provide,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it can be off-putting depending on your relational dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It can
Mm-hmm.
be like really annoying, some of these alpha people, who are kind of stuck in that mode all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think while we have lost it, it is still among us. We can still, seek to be aware of, like, who is modeling this for me, and how can I start to try to reach that inside of me, that place inside of me where I can have that confidence.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. You say have that confidence. And so I want to go back to where we began too, where you said
Yeah.
fake it till you make it. And I think I have
Yes.
heard
Full
Neufeld
circle.
say that. And I wonder about what does that look like? Because
Mhm.
I think again, like we hear alpha and listeners right now might be imagining like what does it look like then to kind of step into this relationship and be the alpha? Like I'm gonna be the alpha. And I think it doesn't come off as that caring
Yeah.
presence with
Yeah.
the generous invitation.
Right. You got to
It
start there.
comes
It's
off
like
more like
going
the bully,
the
if I
boss.
might. The
Yeah.
boss. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, the boss.
Yeah. 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 So part of what has helped, we've, when you're saying, well, what can you do? It's like we've already touched upon um, a lot of these ways to kind of get in front of those needs for our child. So it's like, instead of moving into boss mode, though sometimes we do have to, you know, um, donning, starting from the place of like this idea of retreating into relationship.
Mhm.
How can I be the comforter? How can I work my way into being the compass point? That might take time. How can
Mhm.
I be the provider? How can I be the nurturer? And if we have an antagonistic relationship with our child right now, taking on that role of provider, comforter, and nurturer is going to feel extremely difficult. But the more we can inch our way in, these tiny little strides we can make, going back to kind of where we start at the beginning again, where it's like, what are those roots of attachment? Same, physical. So, how can I have a twinkle in my eye? How can I greet my child when they come in the door? A touch of sameness. What is something that we can do together at the same time? You know, Coming alongside our child versus being at war with our child.
Mhm.
Just
Mhm.
going back to those basics, by assuming responsibility for that, we are already moving into alpha.
Assuming responsibility for that. Now, say more about what that is, please.
If we are no longer putting
Like
the
be real.
responsibility for the relationship on our child,
Yes. Okay. Yes, this is
we are shifting that we're moving into different instincts.
so this is another concept that I think can be challenging both to understand and emotionally, as far as what this looks like and what we're saying here. I think again, um, the seeker, I think moms can go into the seeker instinct here where they are like, I've given and given and given and given, and I'm not getting anything in return. It becomes this kind of transactional
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
expectation of, I'm going to stop doing anything for you because you are not showing enough appreciation or
Oh gosh, I totally know how that feels. I know how that feels. I know that place in me. I'm in and out of it all the time where I'm taking
Mhm,
it personally
mhm,
and I feel
mhm,
personally offended.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
But we got to get ourselves out of there. So, enough. Maybe we're not always out
It
of it,
doesn't
but
feel
we got
very
to get
alpha.
out enough. Well, we feel like victims.
Yes, yes,
Taking responsibility gets us out of the victimhood.
yes, yes, yes. Okay, there you go. Yes, that became my MO. And I came at it, I think, from a sort of a different way. Like for me, it was more about modeling. Like when I realized all I had was like guilt to use to get my kids to do things for me. Yes, so Rose is shaking her head. Um, it hit me. I'm like, no, I want them to want to,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the way I went about that then was deciding that I was only going to do things with love. Now, again, I'm human. I'm not perfect, but resentment became a cue for me, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes so much sense.
So if I was feeling resentment about anything, I would stop and go, okay,
Mm-hmm.
can I do this thing with love?
Mm-hmm.
If I can't, then there is a boundary here that needs to get addressed, right? And
Yeah.
so, but mostly it was about just modeling um, love for my kids and
Yeah.
wanting to do things for other people.
Yeah.
And so then I'm basically doing it for myself, if that makes sense. It's like it makes me feel
Yes.
good to do this thing for you. That's why I'm doing it. Because then I don't need their appreciation, right? I'm doing it
Right.
for me.
Yes. 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 Yeah. I think all of us are going to find different ways in and
Hmm.
different uh kind of like frameworks or wording or ideas that are going to help us
Hmm.
get into this
Hmm.
mode.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but it is something that comes from inside. And that drove me nuts when I would hear Neufeld say this. It was so frustrating. But it's true.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
true. And ultimately, I've said this already, but like for me, it was taking the responsibility to tell my son the truth and get him
Mm.
out that moved me into alpha. And it's not that I'm always there. That
Hmm.
would be a lie, but it changed a fundamental dynamic in our relationship. And the confidence that I held is palpable and I still hold,
Mm.
and it's not that we still don't struggle with all of the things that are challenge in parenting, but I think that was for me when it finally clicked what it was like to be in that sense of confidence against all odds. And that's a dramatic example. My example is pretty dramatic, but it's like,
Well, yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm thinking
mhm,
too, and I want to I want to acknowledge a similar thing. It's not that I don't feel hurt sometimes when I don't get,
mhm,
enough affection or, when my son isn't nice enough to me or, see something that I do for him. I still get hurt sometimes. And I know I'm an alpha when that behavior doesn't penetrate me, if that makes
Totally.
sense. Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this is just I'm sorry, I'm gonna just read a couple things. I know we got to wrap up.
Yeah, yeah.
But but you know, one of a couple of last thoughts with this donning that alpha, or what it feels like to be in the alpha, is
Hmm.
that we're conveying to the child that they're not too much to handle,
Yes.
right? So when
Yes.
those hurts come our way, those barbs or those betrayals, those lack of doing what we wanted them to do after we've done so much, it's like that's not too much for me.
Right.
I'm you good, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's this idea of like the fact that we are actually powerless.
Hmm.
And he talks about concealing one's impotence by inviting the inevitable. So kind of being like, okay, well, I know you're going to want the last word, so go ahead.
Mm.
This, so you're actually getting in front of it. Like, I know
Yes.
you're going to want to top me, so go ahead and do it. And you're actually
Mm.
inviting them
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
be their alpha instinct.
Inviting
And
them to be their alpha instinct.
because yeah, it's like what's coming. You're in the know.
Yes.
You're on top of this situation, so you know what's going to come. It's like, okay, go ahead. I'm waiting.
Uh-huh. 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 Okay.
And you don't have to be sassy about it like I'm being, but it's like,
For
I know you're
me,
going to have
it
a hard time
was,
with this.
yeah, like, help me understand that. I said that a lot to my dad. She
Mm,
would she was trying to barb, right? She was trying to poke me, and I would just be like, huh, yeah, I would get curious about what she was experiencing, if that makes sense. And just
hmm.
again, like you said, invite it.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Make
Okay.
room.
And
Because
and know knowing, yeah. Hmm.
if you're doing the inviting and you're doing the making of room, you're in the alpha and like you're in that set of instincts
Hmm. Well, and yes, okay.
energetically.
Yes, energetically. That is so key. And it's interesting what it can move them to.
Correct.
That if you are allowing those barbs and you're getting sucked into that and you go into that seeker instinct, they're not doing the work they need to do to grow up. But if you can hold that space, they run out of steam in that pretty
Yeah.
quickly, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And
Yeah.
and will soften often. And you can have a productive conversation about whatever is going
Yep.
on. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Oh, oof.
I know.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here, and there's so much more to say, but I'm glad we've gotten some of these basics out there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I
Even with, I
think,
think, some really clear-cut things, I think, to pay attention to and notice
yep,
in yourself, in the dynamic.
yep,
Um, Not
yep.
that, you know, if this is new information and being able to like do much with it. My-
Right. It's a different entry point for understanding and deepening what we've already talked about.
Mhm.
It's like we've
Mhm.
got the plant, we've got the hierarchy, we've got the hammock, we've got that receiving vessel. They're all different vantage points almost
Mhm.
for seeing these different pieces of our this core part of our existence, which is, that seeking of closeness, to love and to be loved. And this piece around alpha for me is just so core to so much of what we're grappling with right now, culturally.
And as we're talking about, yeah, oh, absolutely. Oh my goodness. We might have to do a whole nother episode about that. Um, but when we're talking about modifiers for the alpha, we're talking about the warm alpha or the caring alpha, the nurturing
Hmm.
alpha.
Hmm.
What I'm hearing too is the mature alpha.
Yeah.
is the one who can hold that space and not get emotionally activated
Yeah.
in these interactions with your child. Now, that being said, we have a lot of our own growing up to do. And those
Yeah.
emotions that are coming up for us in those interactions, it's it's important to notice them, recognize them, and explore what is being invited for you
Hmm.
to mature in yourself.
Hmm.
And that is hard to do on your own.
Hmm.
It's I do we
And
we can't just suppress those emotions. That doesn't work. We
no,
can't just shove them down. They're going to come boiling up again in another context,
yeah.
if not right now. They don't just, you can't just suppress them.
Yes. And it's almost like this is the fire we have to walk through
Yes. Yes.
in order that is part of that into that maturation, which is where we have to, you know, um, be able to have our tears of grieving, which is
Hmm.
facilitates that adaptive process in the brain. But it's
Hmm.
also where we say, I am so hurt. On the
Hmm.
one hand, I am
Hmm.
so hurt. But on the other hand, I love my child and I know I need to be bigger than this.
Okay.
Well,
Whew.
thank you. This is, this is one that I think we'll keep unraveling,
Hmm.
especially maybe with more stories and examples. But for
Hmm.
now, I really wanted to
Hmm.
get some of these core nuts and bolts. And
Yes,
so
this
for
is,
now, especially comments welcome, feedback
yes,
welcome, questions welcome, so we
yes,
can keep moving on it in our next episode.
yes. I think this was an incredibly important piece that needed to get unpacked
Yep.
to help people better understand the concept of alpha. And yes, I imagine we will be having many more conversations to clarify. So, as Rose said, please, yes, leave comments, questions. It helps us to know what needs to get filled in, and um, yes, add it to the conversation. Thanks,
Yeah.
Rose.
You're
Okay, this
so welcome.
yeah, this will be our July episode, and we'll be back again next month.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening. We hope you take something of value from our conversation today. Please check out the show notes for additional resources, including a prompt for reflection. We welcome your feedback in the comments and hope you join us for the next episode of Attachment Matters.